Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating young woman. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nasalifya Namwinga. I'm coming to you from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. In Nam, I am 31 years old. So a little bit about me and my journey into this space. So I was born in Zambia to beautiful Zambian parents, Bemba Namwinga tribe, and I moved with my parents when I was 11 years old to the UK. And we lived in Birmingham for a little while. And then from there, we moved to Swansea in Wales, where I lived for, I think, 5 or 6 years, 4 to 5 years. And then my parents decided to relocate once more for the last time to New Zealand, Aotearoa in Hamilton, and lived there for a long time. So finished my schooling there, and went to Auckland Uni and did my undergrad in psychology and criminology, and then from there moved back to Hamilton and did my postgrad studies. So I did my master's in community psychology and then trained as a clinical psychologist as well, which is what my background practice is. And I loved the work. I was very interested in the experience of different people from different backgrounds, how we navigate the world. And I think a lot of that was influenced by the fact that I'd relocated and migrated so many times as a young person. And I found the experience of figuring out my identity in relation to the identities of others that were around me. So the study of psychology always fascinated me because people are very interesting. And I worked in the justice system for a little bit, and then moved to Melbourne and worked in the justice system for a while here. And then pivoted a little bit, went into community mental health. So worked for child and adolescent and adult mental health services, worked in inpatient unit, and then in child and adolescent units. And that work was really fascinating and really challenging. I got to see how different people do the work in different ways and was really inspired by that work. And unfortunately, I had a significant car accident on my way to work that knocked me off my feet for a good few months. I wasn't able to work for a while because I was in quite intensive recovery. And during that time, it gave me a moment to really reflect on the work that I wanted to do. And through that, I decided that I wanted to do private practice, and I wanted to do that full time. So I shifted into the private practice space in 2018, started what was then Paula Psychology. And but the work very quickly overtook what I could do, and I recruited another person to work with me, Tigis Kabidi, who's a counselor, in 2019. And then the pandemic happened in 2020. And we both realized that the work couldn't continue as it was. So we realized that even though we loved doing one-on-one therapeutic work, we actually couldn't therapy people out of experiences of racism. We couldn't therapy people out of systemic issues. So we decided to, again, pivot and start Paula Practice as the company and do a mix of different work. So we continued doing the one-on-one therapy, but we also wanted to do some consultation work with organizations. We wanted to do some more community work, and we also wanted to do some research work. So that shifted the way the practice looked. And in the last 18 months, we've grown the team from Tigis and I to a team of 13 people, including 2 researchers. And that has been really exciting. We've been able to spend some time to really think about how do we make the most impact in the spaces that we want to. And that's led us into the EAP space. So looking at how to better access EAP. What does EAP look like as EAP being an employment assistance program? How do we access that in a way that means that we can excel in our careers? Because we found in supporting women in particular, women of color specifically, in their organizations, that we often wait to be qualified for the roles before we ask for promotions. We often are overqualified for the roles that we're in. We are under-resourced oftentimes, and also that has an impact on how we feel about ourselves in the work and our level of confidence within ourselves. So we've started doing some coaching for particularly women of color, a lot of Black women in leadership roles in organizations, to support them to excel, to find their voices in organizations, to advocate for themselves, to be strategic with the work that they're doing, because we need the impact to be long-lasting and we need it to be broad. So that's a little bit about me. I think one of the things that I often think about is my experience as an African diaspora person, moving across these different spaces, and my journey in figuring out and navigating my own identity. I think having left Zambia when I was so young, there's an aspect of not knowing where I belong and not knowing how to access or engage with my Zambianness, my Africanness, that has inspired me in the background of all the things that I've been doing. And I think a lot of it has been around finding connection and points of connection with women that look like me, that have lived experience like me, and finding points of reference through that to find my own identity and to navigate what that means for me. A really beautiful experience has been working with my business partner, Tigis, who's East African, and finding ways to talk about culture and where we come from without centering whiteness. I think the interesting thing is that we often talk about our identity as migrants or as the minority, in contrast to how it's different to whiteness, which is quite a limiting experience. But when we actually talk about it in contrast and in comparison to other people from the global majority, we have a very different, nuanced conversation about culture. And through those dialogues, it's been really beautiful to see the similarities between our experiences as Black women, as African women, but also the differences, because those points of difference are actually what makes up my specific culture as a Zambian woman. And yeah, so there's the nuances of having those conversations, having dialogues with other women that have lived experience that is parallel or similar to your own has really been a point of shifting for me in terms of understanding my own identity in comparison, not to the whiteness, but in comparison to other global majority people. So in the practice, we have a lovely range of different kinds of different people from different backgrounds, and we are constantly in dialogue about finding the similarities and differences between ourselves and how that nuance and that difference impacts how we practice as therapists and how we actually even just walk and exist within the world. It's so beautiful to be on this setup and this part of this conversation, because it's broadening that connection with other people, other women across the world who are navigating the same thing. Often we feel like we're alone in our experiences, and when we're in spaces like this, when we're able to have dialogue like this and find connection through the stories and the narratives that we hear about each other, it's so powerful. Because one, it means that we understand that we're not alone, and two, sometimes it gives us points of connection of how we can choose to navigate the world differently and in a more empowered way. Yeah, I'm really passionate about the fact that as the global majority, as women, we bring so much depth into the spaces that we work. We are an asset to every space that we're in, because we think differently. We see the world differently. When I think about myself, one of the things that I learned to do very early on when I was doing interviews is to talk about my experience of navigating different worlds, being an African, being a Black woman, and growing up within that household, and then also existing within a Western context. Being educated within a Western context means that I've had to learn to navigate both worlds, both my Africanness and also my diaspora experience, also my experience having been predominantly raised in the West and educated in the West, and my ability to make connection between both actually means that I have a different way of thinking about things. I've had to learn different tools and strategies to problem solve just in my own navigation of the world. That makes me an asset in any place that I go into, because I also have the ability and have had to learn the skill of how to connect to people that are different to me and find points of connection. And I often, when I talk to young women, I often talk about, make sure that you talk about yourself as an asset, because you're going into a space, you're bringing, it's not just diversity in terms of how we look, but it's diversity in how we think, how we conceptualize the world, and how we navigate the world. So it's really important to see yourself and to see ourselves as assets in the places that we go into, and stand in that power and stand in that knowledge of self as being powerful, resourceful, and thinking about the world in different ways. I think when I think about the intersections of my own identity and the identities of the women I'm around, I think about how that capacity, that the breadth of capacity you have to navigate these different identities and negotiate your way into spaces and negotiate connecting to people in different ways. I think it's a really powerful thing that often we don't recognize it as power. We don't recognize it as a strength, but that is something that no one else can bring into spaces unless they've walked in your shoes. So it's very exciting to join this group of women and to be part of this interview. And that's just a little bit about me, a little bit about my story and the things that I am passionate about. Yeah.
Wow. This is absolute music to my ears. You know, when I discovered that you were here in Melbourne, I got really excited because the work you are doing is so necessary right now.
Mm.
A lot of times, as women of color, we undersell ourselves.
Yeah.
We are not even aware of the value that we bring to organizations.
Yeah.
So I'm going to just go back to a few things that you said that really hit home for me. You talked about avoiding centering whiteness.
Mm-hmm.
Conceptualize that and really frame it so people get what that means.
Yeah, so I'll speak specifically about the Zambian experience. So Zambia was a British colony, and we're currently in a state of neocolonialism, which is just a colonialism by another name. Um, but what happens when you've been colonized? I'll speak about it as a country. Is that the systems that you have in place are not your own? So we have the framework of government, the framework of how we do education is adopted from the British. So even when I went through schooling, we talk about learning British English, the Queen's English, and even our language is English. I remember being in school and not being allowed to speak vernacular. So you're only allowed to speak English within the school in your own country. So that is how whiteness is centered, because even in our own home, what is central, what is forming the foundations of our country to an extent, is not indigenous to us. It's not our own thinking, our own way of being. So I guess I use Zambia and that as a concept to talk about the experience of the person, the self, in that if you exist in a world that says then you are not the norm, the norm is white, male, cis, het, and any deviation from that makes you the oddity. It means that every time you're talking about your own identity, it's in how you are different from a white male cis het person, not about your identity in isolation. It's actually in comparison to that as being the norm and the standard, and we are deviations from that, which is not true because we are the global majority. We actually not, we are the norm. And yes, centering whiteness makes us feel like we are deviations or like mutations of whiteness, but we're actually not. We're different animal altogether. We're a very unique, specific group of people. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. Now, in terms of your identity, let's talk about intersectionality for a
Yeah.
minute. So you were born in Zambia, you've lived in the UK, you've lived in Wales, you've lived in New Zealand, you're now in Australia. You have taken aspects of all of those places you've lived to be who you are.
Yeah.
How many times do you have to explain that to people? And how do you actually identify yourself? Do you identify yourself as being a Black Kiwi? So what is your identity?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And it's one that it's always shifting every now and then. I think at the moment, there's an author who wrote the book Ghana Must Go, and she's an incredible writer and talks a lot about the Afro diaspora experience. And she wrote, I think it was just a think piece about the Afropolitan, which talks about that experience of like, well, I'm African. That is a core part of who I am. It is integral to who I am. But as an African not in Africa, who's lived in the diaspora, there's a distinction of what that means. So I guess I identify as an Afropolitan at the moment because that is the most recent article that I read about how to identify.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because it's more honest of what my experience is, because I think it would be dishonest to say, for me, it feels dishonest to just say Zambian because I haven't lived there for 20 odd years. I actually am not in touch with what's happening there in a way that is important for people to, if they're going to identify as African, and as Zambian specifically. I am not in touch with what's happening in Zambia. I'm in touch with what's happening here, which means that's kind of how I think about it. Yeah.
It's interesting because like you, I lived in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in New Zealand, the US, South Africa, and now Melbourne, but I identify as a Black Kiwi. New Zealand is the one
Mm.
country I lived the longest.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting space to live between many worlds.
Yeah.
But what would you say that life experience has done for you in
Mm.
terms of understanding other nations, other people?
Yeah. I think as a young person, I think specifically about my experience in school and high school specifically, when all you're trying to do is just fit in and be like everyone else. I think what it meant is that I really tried to find connection with every person around me because I just needed to connect. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be with the cool kids, which, has shifted now as an adult. My thinking is a little bit different. But it meant that I've always looked for points of connection with people, no matter what their experience is, no matter how different they are to me. Always looking for those points of connection and helping them see the points of connection with myself as well, which is sometimes is a useful strategic thing to do to humanize myself in spaces where I may not be humanized. So I guess it's the tools that I used once to fit in, I now use more strategically to gain access into spaces, to find connections so that people can see me in a similar way they see themselves, so that we can then connect and we can have conversations about shifting change. So I think that's kind of, but now I choose to stand out with my blonde hair, my bright green shirt. I'm not trying to fit in anymore, but I still use those tools.
I love it. And that's the other thing, right? Our point of difference is a strength, not a weakness. You're going to stand out no matter what you do, no matter what room you walk into.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about how you have broken the barriers to sit on boards, sit in leadership positions.
Mm.
What were the strategic moves that you took to get to the table where most women of color are not sitting?
Yeah, I think one is the one thing I do is I want to stand out in the space, but stand out on my terms. So choosing to have blonde hair, choosing to wear bright colors, or like I love clothes, so always choosing to wear the most ridiculous outfit in the room. Um, to me, that's been strategic because when I go into spaces, I want people to approach me because of for whatever reason, because those are my terms. So I will happily have people approach me to talk about my bright colored clothes, my blonde hair, or whatever. And then through that, I use that they're being drawn to me to actually find out about them and then make the point of connection, or maybe drop a little gem about what I do, why I do it, and that sort of thing. But I also did an experiment while I travel a fair amount for relief from the work. And one of the things I love doing is sitting at a bar and just trying to find someone to have a conversation with and testing out different ways of connecting with people. That may not be for everyone, but I think I love the idea of the challenge of finding someone who's so different to me and seeing if we can connect in some way. So that's a skill set that I think needs harnessing, which is why I do it when I travel. But yeah, just finding points of connection, and then in the conversation, in the connection, dropping kind of what it is that I do and why I do it, and getting them curious about what the work I am in.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I moved to Melbourne, it got really difficult to break into the right circles.
Yeah.
So I joined a golf club and I
Awesome.
bought one golf stick and I would go into the batting cages on a Friday and just hit that ball. Then I'd go and sit in the bar and just talk to interesting people,
Yeah,
right?
it's so effective because sometimes we wait for permission to go into spaces, and sometimes you just need to like wander your way in and pretend you fit in anyway.
I love it. Now, let's talk about allyship and the
Mhm.
importance of allyship within organizations in progressing one's career.
Mm.
How should women of color find the allies, find the sponsors and the mentors. And let's talk about all three of them differently and what each three can do for you and your career.
Yeah, so I think I definitely have not gotten here without having allies. And allies look different in different spaces. I think one thing that I've always learned to do, and again, this is about my high school experience of needing to fit in, is always finding a friend. Because finding a friend in an organization helps you survive the work, even when the organization is unsafe. So finding someone that I have some connection to, just one, because we're human beings, we're social creatures. We need to have someone that we're able to talk to when we go into the office. So finding that friend has been the first thing, so that just for your own psychological safety, to have someone that you can talk to. Secondly is more strategic, is ensuring that the people above you like you, which is a controversial thing to say, but the reality is that progression often doesn't happen because you're the most qualified. It's because you're the person people think of when the promotion comes up. So being liked, or being at least thought of, being someone that people in higher levels will consider, is an important thing to be, if that's what you're trying to do. If you're trying to progress, people have to be able to see you as someone who is going to progress. So the thing I suggest to people is, I love those manager review meetings, because then I talk about my passion in the room. Even if it's not, I'll just find a way to bring it in. I'll be like, this is why I'm passionate about this work, and this is why I want to progress to X, Y, and Z level. And asking them, what do you think I need to do to progress to X, Y, and Z level? To be very clear that my goal, my ambition is to progress within this organization. And I'm asking you, because you're knowledgeable, to tell me what it is I need to do that. One, because I think people like to, it's kind of human nature to want to build someone up if they're asking you for help. They're asking you for your expertise. So people in positions of power have expertise, and sometimes they don't get to use them. So being someone who's saying, hey, I'm here, if you want to share your pearls of wisdom with me, I will listen. That's a very strategic and important thing to be able to do, in my experience.
But I love the fact that you're very clear where you're going.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people go into organizations without that level of clarity in terms of their career progression. So getting clear, where do I want to be 3 years from now, 5 years from now?
Yeah.
And then putting yourself in those rooms and having those conversations.
Yeah. And asking people to support you to get there. Just blatantly being, I want to get there. What can I do?
I love it. And you're really being proactive. You're not waiting for the system to get you there. Yeah. Wow. Now, based on what life has taught you up to this point, if you could go back to the younger you and give yourself 3 nuggets of wisdom based on what you have learned from life and being in this space, what would those 3 nuggets of wisdom be?
I think the 3 things I'd say to myself is that you're okay. That the way you are in every aspect is okay. Because I think I needed to know that I was okay to then exist in the world in a way that showed that and asked for the things I deserved. So one is know that you're okay. The second thing is, it's okay not to know exactly where you want to end up, but have a plan for at least the next 12 months. Be strategic about, at least in the short term, even if you don't know where you want to be in the long term. And the third thing is, find the people that appreciate you. And that quote, if you're at a table and respect isn't being served, it's okay to leave the table and find a different one.
Yeah. What is that saying? When love is not being served at the table, it's time to leave.
Yes. And I use that for love, but in workplaces, sometimes it's about, if respect is not on offer, it's okay to leave.
I love that. All right. My last question for you is, let me teleport you into the future.
Yes.
Let's imagine that time is an illusion, it doesn't exist. And I could take you into the future and you could have a conversation with a 90-year-old you. And you're sitting in your rocking chair, surrounded by your children, your dogs, your cats, whoever is with you at that time.
Mm.
If you could have a conversation with the future you based on how you're living your life, what would you say to this wise woman who's led you to that point?
Mm. I've been reading a lot about Afrofuturism at the moment, so this is very much that fitting into that, which I love. I think the conversations I'd have is probably, that's a very good question. I guess I'd want to know how she feels about the journey getting there, and also the I'd want to know about the joy in the journey, because I think oftentimes it's really easy to think about the pain and the hardship and the struggle. But I'd want to know about the joy. What was the most joyful thing? What are the joys that she's seen in the world that she's existed in? Yeah, I'd want to know about the joy, the wins only and the joy only.
I love it. I love asking women this question because a lot of times we forget that that wise woman is already in us. Is already guiding you. And sometimes you just have to tune into the energy of who you are becoming. I do this a lot. I go into meditation if I'm struggling with anything, and I just ask myself the question, what is my next step?
Yeah.
And sometimes it percolates through my dreams and I get these weird promptings to do something. And I keep talking about it with other people and people give me the solutions. But it's already in you and you're already changing the world in a big way with what you've done with your business. So keep following those promptings. You are on the right track. It's going to be amazing when you look back at the age of 90.
Thank you so much. I love that question. I'm going to be thinking about it for the rest of the week.
Oh, man, it's been such a pleasure connecting with you, getting to know you. What are your parting thoughts for our audience today?
I think the biggest is know your power, know your strength, and know what you bring to the table and own it. And do not allow anyone else's inability to see it change the fact that you believe that it's real.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is connecting some phenomenal people right across the globe. If you are looking for psychological help, tell everybody what you do in your business so they get an essence of the different aspects that you are offering.
Absolutely. So the core of the business is individual therapy. We provide counseling for couples, single individuals. We do some group work. So the core is therapeutic intervention with our team of incredible practitioners. We also do some consulting work specifically around well-being within the workspace as part of the EAP services that we provide. So if you're looking for some creative ways to improve the well-being of your team, we are always available and keen to have a chat. And yeah, so those are the core things that we do. And you can access either of those through the website. There's forms that you can fill and contact us, and we can just have a starting point to have a conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. I'll be back again tomorrow with yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And bye for now. Thanks again for the interview.
Thank you.
Bye for now, everybody. Wrap everybody on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open,